Okay, finally tonight, the White House's proposed budget for NASA. It includes a 24% funding cut and would shift the space agency's focus away from scientific research and towards human exploration. President Trump has set an ambitious goal for humans to reach Mars within the next 4 years, but how they'll get there remains uncertain. The budget proposals are reported to include a nearly 50% cut in NASA's science programs. Newsnight spoke this week with Ken Kramer, managing editor of Space Up Close and a retired research scientist in Titusville. He's particularly concerned about the Mars sample return project facing cancellation.
What they have done is cut the science out of the heart of NASA, 50% cut, completely crazy. Many scientists at many universities and engineers will be laid off. Right now, the Perseverance rover is on Mars collecting 40 soil samples, soil and rock samples, that would be collected by Mars Sample Return and bring them back here roughly 10 years or so. So this project has been underway for several years. A lot of money's already been spent. It is very expensive. NASA's looking for a cheaper architecture, but those samples are really the best way to determine if there has ever been life on Mars in the past, maybe even in the present. We need those samples. So it's crazy to cancel this mission. Absolutely crazy. And it sets science back and will force layoffs among scientists.
Ken Kramer there. Okay, Brendan, let's break this all down. Big picture, what stands out to you from this proposed budget?
Just the dramatic cut itself. So the current budget as it stands right now, $24.8 billion. The skinny budget proposal set forth by the Trump administration, $18.8 billion. This is a dramatic shift in where this administration wants the agency to go and where it's putting its resources. And I should say the pathway that NASA was on was set by the first Trump administration, right? The Artemis program, getting humans on the moon by the end of the decade. And now this essentially says, nope, we're going to shift our efforts elsewhere. We're going to send humans to Mars. And the rationale behind it is to beat China and other adversaries to get there.
Yeah, I mean, put this in a historical context if you can. I mean, where does it leave the space program, compared to other times in the past?
Yeah. I asked Casey Dreyer about this. He's from the Planetary Society, which is a science advocacy organization. This is, according to his analysis, the greatest year-over-year funding cuts in the history of the agency. And to put it into perspective, by adjusting for inflation, the budget for NASA, if this goes through as the president has recommended, the budget for NASA, this would be the same budget adjusted for inflation that the agency had in 1961. I mean, that is dramatic.
And we weren't flying as much then.
We weren't flying as much, yeah. To put that into perspective, we had just put a human into orbit at that point and did not have an International Space Station, robotic rovers, climate observations, anything like that. We were very laser focused on putting humans in space.
Yeah, talking of which, I want to talk about the SLS and Orion in a moment. But first, let's talk about those proposed cuts for NASA's science programs and research, which we heard Ken Kramer talking about there. Much spending has already been put into things like that Mars sample return, new space telescope as well that could be axed. There's a lot of programs on the chopping block here.
The big one, as Ken mentioned, is the Mars sample return.
Yeah.
And this is the agency's highest priority science mission. The Perseverance rover, billions of dollars, thousands of people worked on this machine to get onto the surface of Mars. It's out there exploring Mars, but really its number one priority was to grab these samples of the Martian dirt, pack them in these little modules that will then be picked up and brought back home to Earth. Scientists believe that there could be signs of life, ancient signs of life on Mars, since Mars once had water. The only way for us to conclusively say that that's true is for us to get our hands on those samples. That goes away. I've spoken to a number of scientists who are involved in this, and they are just completely disheartened by this because their life's work is going into this mission, and we may never know the answer. The Trump administration says, well, since we're putting humans on the surface of Mars, they can just snag up those samples and bring them home. But it's very unclear if a human mission would even go to the same places that these samples are, or if it would even get there in the first place.
Well, what's all this going to mean then for the Space Launch System and Orion? That's what captures a lot of people's imaginations. It's the backbone of the Artemis program. It's already cost tens of billions of dollars. What's going to happen there?
According to this proposal, it goes away after Artemis 3. So the next mission to launch is Artemis 2. That one's going to have the crew on board, and Artemis 3, which will land on the surface of the moon.
So 2 goes, but without landing.
2 goes without landing, 3 goes with landing, and then, according to this budget, that's done. We move on to Mars. That means SLS, future iterations, go away. The current plan has up to 10 launchers being manufactured. Orion goes away, and Gateway, which is a planned space station, a tiny space station at that would orbit the moon as well, that would be needed to get astronauts to the surface, and the long duration science that we would learn from being on the moon for a long period of time.
Well, I mean, Artemis 4 onwards was intended to sort of begin that work to establish, I guess, a long-term human presence on the lunar surface. I guess that concept is dead now?
According to this budget plan, the concept is dead. The one thing that could happen is Congress still has the power of the purse, right? Congress is still responsible for appropriating
this is
this
just
money.
a proposed
This is
budget.
just a proposed budget. SLS, Orion, human exploration is so seated in so many different districts throughout the U.S. You've got different space centers all across the country. And a lot of lawmakers want to make sure that this money comes to their districts to continue a lot of the work on SLS, a lot of the work on Orion. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamics between the lawmakers as to whether or not they'll go with what the president wants or what their constituents wants, which is jobs and development with the space agency.
I mean, there is the headline, of course, is the cut. There is a slight bump for human exploration. That includes an extra $1 billion for Mars, which, as we know and we've talked about before, is a Trump priority. Do we get an idea where that extra funding for Mars is going to be spent, given that SLS and Orion are set to go away? Is that going to go to private endeavors?
We don't know. We would assume that it would go to private endeavors because that would be the only way to make this possible. But I mean, a mission to Mars is very, very difficult. And NASA has laid out its plans for Moon to Mars, right? You learn to live on the Moon, which is far closer than Mars. The Moon takes just a few days to get to. Mars would take months, if not years, for one of those missions to go about it. So a human mission to Mars at this particular timeline, most experts say, is not possible. And $1 billion, not going to be enough to even pull it off.
The New York Times wrote that this budget kind of aligns with SpaceX CEO Elon Musk's priorities. Do you agree with that?
It does. And we've gotten an indication that Elon Musk is digging his heels into this as well. His company SpaceX is about to launch its Starship in the very near future. And Elon has announced that right before that launch, he is going to outline his company's plans for Mars moving forward. He's done this quite a few times over the years, but the timing of this is not coincidental at all. He is making the case for his company to be the one that takes us to Mars.
Well, we should talk about what it means for companies involved in Artemis directly and workers on the Space Coast. What kind of economic impacts might we see there?
Yeah, so I was thinking back to this, and the last time we lost a major program of this caliber was the Space Shuttle. And as you and I both know, that was very detrimental to the Space Coast economy and even beyond the Space Coast, right? NASA has diversified, and a lot of the work that's being done out at the Space Coast is from the private sector. So we can guess that it won't be as bad, but a lot of the work that is done by the private sector is propelled by NASA, right? Making that initial investment or having a plan to go and do something, being the cheerleader for it, being the bankroll for it, and then developing private companies. So people like Casey Dreyer are very concerned that if NASA goes away in that sense, then the commercial companies don't have anything to work for, and there could be some long-standing effects to that.
Were NASA watchers surprised by the president's proposed budget? I mean, he had increased NASA's budget in previous years during his first administration. I wonder whether there was surprise and why we're seeing cuts now.
It was a surprise. This has been something that the first Trump administration had really been behind, had really rallied behind. You could argue that the Artemis missions wouldn't have moved this quickly if it wasn't for President Trump and then Vice President Mike Pence really moving that forward. So to see these cuts really did take a lot of people by surprise. But when you look at it, you're looking at cuts across the board when it comes to the federal government. So this is really not too much as a surprise as you see what the priorities are for the Trump administration in this second term, but they are going to be detrimental to the agency.